I only went back to
That's good.
Okay, good morning. It is still morning. Good morning. My name is Emma Schwartz, and I'm the chair of the Agency Operations Committee. It is 11:52 a.m., and I'd like to call the July 26th Agency Operations Committee meeting to order. Please be aware that this meeting is being broadcast via the internet. So before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome those joining us via video conference and ask that they observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak, mute your phone when not speaking, and keep background noise to a minimum. When I call your name, please announce present. Welcome Wilson, Vice Chair.
Present.
Jahid Anwar, I don't believe you're second. Fred Fadias,
Present.
Stacy Khan, Donna Williams, present. Paige Sawyer, student member,
Present.
and myself, Emma Schwartz. Please record in the minutes that we have. Agenda item 2 is approval of the minutes from the April 26, 2023 Agency Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes? So motion made by Ms. Williams.
Second.
And a second by Mr. Wilson. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion passes. Agenda item 3 is public testimony. We do not have anyone registered to testify today, so we'll go on to the next item. Agenda item 4 is approval of the consent calendar. We do not have any items on the consent calendar today, so we'll move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 5A is a report on grants and contracts. This item does not require any action. Members, the reports were included in the supplemental materials with the agenda materials that you received prior to the meeting. Ms. Linda Natal, Director of Contracts and Grant Management, is available for you if you have any questions. No questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 5B is an update on the 88th legislative session. This item also does not require any action. Ms. Amy Peterson, Assistant Commissioner for External Relations, will present this item and be available for questions. Ms. Peterson.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So the 88th legislature, they adjourned on May 29th. They really made some incredibly important investments in higher ed this session. It's clear that the investments in the higher ed policies that they adopted were really made with building a talent strong Texas in mind, because they really closely align with our goals around attainment of credentials of value and research. So by the end of the session, our priority legislation made it through the process to enactment. I'm going to give you all a few examples that directly impact the agency and our work. Hospital 8, we've already heard about a little. It creates a new community college finance system that's almost entirely based on outcomes, but also ensures that colleges can access a baseline level of funding for operations. It also creates a new FAFSA program under which educationally disadvantaged students can participate in dual credit courses at no cost. And really, there's so much more to that rule, but I'm going to leave that because y'all are going to hear a lot more about that over your next few meetings. HJR 3 and HB 1595 provide new funding for the emerging research universities through the Texas University Fund for non-PUF eligible institutions and the National Research Support Fund for PUF eligible schools. Also already mentioned House Bill 1590. It codifies our Texas Leadership Scholars Program, and it adds a new component to support our graduate students. House Bill 2920 requires us to provide post-secondary outcomes data to prospective students, which we're going to do through our My Texas Future portal. House Bill 3447 and House Bill 5174 create state commissions and consortium to advance our semiconductor and aerospace industries, including dedicated funds to support research and economic development projects in these areas. Senate Bill 1887 codifies the Texas Direct Associate degree, and as well as other policies developed through our work with the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee. Senate Bill 2139 creates the Opportunity High School Diploma Program, through which students in workforce education programs at community colleges can also earn a high school degree or a high school diploma at the same time. And finally, Senate Bill 2294 expands our Campus First Scholarship Program. so that participating students may choose to attend any public institution of higher ed in the state, rather than just one of our research or emerging research universities. So I know that was a long list, and there are many other important bills that I didn't cover, but without a doubt, the budget was really the highlight of this session for higher ed. Through House Bill 1, our General Appropriations Act for fiscal year 24-25, and Senate Bill 30, the Supplemental Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 23, the legislature invested about an additional $7 billion in higher ed. Senate Bill 30, the supplemental bill, it includes $3 billion for the Texas University Fund, $1.4 billion related to semiconductor innovation projects, and that includes almost $700 million for that Texas Semiconductor Innovation Fund mentioned. About $244 million to fully fund the obligations of the Texas Guaranteed Tuition Plan, and $141 million to close out our Beyond Time program and redistribute that money back to the institutions. House Bill 1, the main budget, includes $683 million to implement House Bill 8, and that includes a $139 million increase for TEOGs, almost $700 million to fund the college affordability proposal advanced by the university systems, and that includes funding for their formulas, for higher ed group insurance rates, and for Hazelwood reimbursements. It also includes $350 million for economic development and research projects related to the aerospace industry. So specifically for the coordinating board, we got new funding for all of our 4 exceptional items, about $20 million for data security and modernization, $20 million for advising that's going to support our My Texas Future project, $20 million for innovation and collaboration, and that's going to support student success initiatives and digital learning. And then $149 million for our major need-based student financial aid programs and Texas Leadership Scholars. I'm going to note that the legislature really prioritized student financial aid this session. They invested about $437 new total for it. And that includes those programs I just mentioned, as well as the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program and a new nursing scholarship through Senate Bill 25. They also prioritized our healthcare workforce programs. We got about $150 million new for those across all of our programs. That includes really large increases for mental health professional and nursing faculty loan repayment programs, as well as our nursing shortage reduction program. So it was a great session. But since they did adjourn their regular session, they came back for 2 specials since we last spoke. The first called session ended immediately after the regular session, focused on very specific call around property tax and border security. Nothing came out of that session. They met again, I think right around the beginning of July, and they did get a property tax bill passed. So we should not see them for the next couple months. According to rumors, they're probably going to be back in October to talk about public education funding. I don't think that we're going to be included on anything that's going to be on the call, but if that changes, we will let you know. And then in the meantime, we are going to send y'all within the next few days a summary of the entire legislative session, including the budget, information on the bills I mentioned, plus all the others that I didn't. And it should be a good resource for y'all to use going forward.
A major congratulations to the coordinating board staff and leadership.
Very much so. I would definitely, Ms. Peterson, you and your team, Commissioner. Every time higher ed came, I had calls from chairmen, both the House and the Senate. Just kudos to the whole team here at the coordinating board. I know you were always there walking the halls, and Commissioner did a great job testifying, and I would be up late at night on weekends looking at the tapes. And so the team, Commissioner, did great. Everybody, Amy, and your communication with me, and thanking the legislature, all the legislators for their support. This was a higher education session. We talked about those in the past, but this one came to fruition, and all those millions are going to benefit students and higher education in our state. But again, like the community college finance, it doesn't happen by accident. There's been a lot of work by the team here at the agency that have put us in a position to be able to educate legislators and key stakeholders about the importance of higher education in our state and how funds play a key role, obviously, in terms of accomplishing the goals that we have for higher education in the state. So thank you, Amy, and your team, Commissioner, and all those that stepped up when the Commissioner asked the coordinating board, the members, to call key folks in the legislature and leadership to be able to come through and help us to be able to make these things happen for the state of Texas and higher education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say thank you for your leadership and partnership. The conversations with the board members and legislative leadership, governor, other members of the legislature was really critical to being produce this outcome, as was the partnership with the institutions. So our team was able to work very closely with institutions. We committed that we wanted to be a resource, a credible partner with the institutions and advocate. Through this session, we didn't always agree on every detail of every policy with the institutions, but we were able to work in close partnership throughout. And I'm deeply grateful for what we were able to achieve together in this session. And I did also want to second your congratulations and thanks to Amy Peterson and to her team. That we were really exceptional external relations team that kept their fingers on the pulse of all of the developments, and we stayed very closely connected with the legislators and with the team throughout. So thank you to Amy and to our team.
Now they, as you say, the real work begins.
Yeah.
So good luck.
More projects, more work.
Are there any more questions from speakers? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 6A is review of the fiscal year 2023 financial report to the board. This item does not require any action. Mr. Anthony Infantini, Chief Financial Officer, will present this item to the committee and be available for questions. Mr. Infantini.
Good morning, members. My name is Anthony Infantini, the Chief Financial Officer, and it's my pleasure to present financial reports to the committee. The report we have is through May, which is 9 months of our fiscal year 2023, and that's the second year of our 2-year biennium that's ending this August 31st. Compared to last quarter, there's no real main changes. A lot of that report is budget adjustments, which are attributable to 2 categories. One is our GEAR funding, or federal funding, which is money we received in a prior state fiscal year, but the federal kind of spending period extended through 2023 and actually goes into 1 month of fiscal year 2024. So we need to adjust our budgets to move that money into our state fiscal years for spending. And then kind of we'll have to monitor that and do the same thing in 2024 to kind of close out those grants. There's also just unexpended balance or UB adjustments, which those are riders typically that give us authority to move funds within the fiscal years of the biennium. Sometimes they allow us to roll money across the biennium, but generally speaking, the language in the rider will tell us kind of what money we can move. So there's a lot of adjustments that kind of go in that as we close out one fiscal year and open another. And while not in this report, I do want to point out the supplemental appropriations bill, Senate Bill 30, which was signed in June, did give us additional capital budget authority for the current biennium, which allows us to kind of have certain gear expenses and other unplanned items have to go to our data center bill, which is governed by our capital budget appropriation. And that authority allows us to kind of direct those federal funds there. So there's going to be some more closeouts as you know the months, these last months really kind of come up quickly on us to get everything implemented. And one of those reasons is we've been working to transition to the CAPS financial accounting system. So we are moving from our own internal accounting system to a more centralized accounting system. We're one of the last agencies to kind of do that. So it's requiring us to close our financial system down earlier than we normally would. So what we need to do is be able to move our active contracts and our fund balances over. So in order to do that, we've really tried to accelerate some of our cleanup efforts. I just want to mention it's been a big lift for a lot of my team, and testing has included a lot of the agency, and they'll need to use the system to administer grants or procure things in the future. So we're scheduled to go live in September, and we're working to resolve kind of our glitches and, process issues and seeing what we still need to be able to do in order to, make sure the money that needs to go out in September can go out. It's really our number one priority. I want to shift over to our bonds of supporting our student loans. So our college access loans, we fund those on an academic year basis. To raise money to support those loans, we issue bonds, and we have. I mentioned in prior months, prior quarters that we've been targeting in mid-July issuance of the bonds to raise money, but building in flexibility at that timing as the conditions warranted. And then after recent Federal Reserve meetings, there was a pause in interest rate hikes, so we were able to take advantage of kind of the market reaction to that and kind of accelerate our bond issue to the end of June. So one of the things that as a result, we were able to issue $140 million of bonds at a yield or an arbitrage yield, which is what we use for our tax exempt compliance of under 4%, which was well below what we were projecting last year, all the way up until early June and even throughout this year. And then given the changes in the interest rate environments from our last bond issue in June 2022 to now, and we consider that a very favorable outcome. So as a result, new college access loans are going to be able to be issued at an interest rate of 5.85% in September. That's an increase from the current rate of 5.35%. But again, if we waited on our normal timeline, we think the rate probably would have been well over 6% because the Treasury yields are a good barometer for our bonds. They spiked about 25 basis points in the week after we issued our bonds. So what I do want to point out that while that yield was better than what we were anticipating, we did not do any refunding of the 2013 bonds. The savings just weren't there to kind of call those bonds and reissue new bonds in the current interest rate environment. It's not a one bite at the apple though. So if interest rates decrease and if the savings develop, we have the ability to do so, and we'll kind of look at our authority as that warrants. So beyond that, just looking up if you have any questions on the report or just anything responsible.
Just a comment that I think it's wise to hold off on reissuing the old bonds. Then it doesn't really make sense to do it.
Yeah, the numbers just weren't. We didn't want to close the door on this. It was very volatile early in the year, but the numbers just weren't there.
So Anthony, as volatility and all, and thanks for the leadership month because we have the updates on that. But my question, I think, is how we compare the states. We said 5.3%, 5.85% now. How do we compare?
We're still extremely favorable. I mean, what we have that's kind of unique for Texas is the state backing, the general obligation. They back our loan. So we get the AAA rating that is with the state of Texas financial situation. It's not necessarily a reflection of the payments, and it's really the fact that Texas was in such a good financial position. Our rates are very low. It's hard to do an apples to apples that I've asked kind of across the board, just because all the programs seem to be so different. But just given trend lines, our increase has been either in line with the federal loan increases or much less than the other items we've seen. So we've been able to, I think, stave off some of those big interest rate hikes that are kind of everyone's experiencing kind of across the board.
I have a question for Commissioner Keller. Will you give a elevator pitch to our new board members on our college loan program?
Delighted to do it.
And if you're on attention right now with the federal, what's going on with the current administration?
So Anthony mentioned, so we're the only state that have a state student loan program that's backed by full faith and credit state backed by general obligation bonds. And that's got a lot of advantages for us, obviously being able to provide loans at very competitive interest rates, comparable to what the federal student loans are. A couple of important differences, though, is that the board has recently set up some limits on lending that are tied to our analyses of what typical wages look like that are associated with different kinds of credentials. Because Dr. Trotman and Dr. Humphreys presented, we have a target that we want students to either have no debt or manageable debt for the kinds of credentials that they're completing. And so, unlike the federal government, we do condition our lending and our program on the value of credentials in our labor. The other thing that I would highlight is that the board was able to, because of the refunding of some bonds that Anthony mentions, set up a new revolving fund with the college access loan program that we call the forward loans. And so we have, this is being capitalized with $200 million over 4 years to provide below market interest loans for high demand credentials that are 2 years of duration or less. So you could use it for a short-term workforce credential that's in a high demand field. You could use it for the last 2 years of your engineering and nursing program. And for this next year, we have 3.85% interest rate. The default repayment for that program will be an income-based income-based repayment, and folks repaying their loans will essentially replenish the that revolving fund. So it's called forward loans because the way it's set up is the borrowers literally pay it forward, whereby repaying their loans, they give other folks the opportunity to be able to pursue these credentials. That's another sort of unique tool in the toolbox that the coordinating board was able to create and capitalize because of the structure of the loan program, and I would say also because of the strong support from Governor Abbott, legislative leadership, the legislature, and trusting the coordinating board this unique loan program.
So including the money we just got, what's the value of our student loans?
Overall,
Around
what's the total that we have outstanding?
Yeah, I think maybe a little more.
Yeah, so we have 1.5 billion now,
Yeah.
new students under this program. And like you said, it's the idea is don't loan money to somebody who's, you're not doing them a service. Loan them money they can't pay back.
And that will show up in our future kind of bond issue sizes. So the 140 million now was given where we are and kind of how things projected and just the timing of things as all of these programs are fully implemented and become prescribed and we have a good idea of those impacts. The real impact we should be issuing less bonds over time because there shouldn't be as much as far as the new loan.
Okay, are there any other questions on this? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 6B is consideration and possible action to adopt the agency operating budget for fiscal years 2024 and 2025. Mr. Anthony Infantini again will present this item to the committee and be available for questions.
As you know, a sheet that's similar to what was provided. One issue we had in trying to fit all this on the one page was the very last item of appropriation, which is our autism program, was hidden in the first sheet you had. All the totals, all the numbers are the same, but I wanted you to have the full numbers so you can refer to that. And apologies for my trying to fit this all in one page because there's a lot here as far as the budget. So Amy mentioned a lot of details. I'll try not to go over them and too much won't duplicate, but I'm happy to present this 2-year biennial budget for the board review and approval. The budget itself, kind of want to walk back, starts with our legislative appropriations request or LAR. This was approved by the board last July and it includes our base budget request and then the additional request for exceptional items. The base budget didn't include any of these gear items that I mentioned or some of the other special funding items that showed up in our budget this year, like that was tied to Senate Bill 8 in a previously called special session. Both chambers of the legislature then add or subtract from that base budget and then work together to form the conference committee of the budget, which was House Bill 1 this session. The unprecedented surplus that's been mentioned meant there really was not a lot of subtracting being done for base budgets. And I want to point out in normal cycles, generally you're focusing on maintaining your base budget and looking at fulfilling one or some of your priority exceptional items. But this wasn't a normal budget cycle. So I want to walk you through at a high level kind of some of these changes. There's also that Senate Bill 30, the supplemental appropriations bill. It does impact some of our operating budget that did give us money. And it gave us money in 2-year buckets, whereas a lot of the normal budgets, they'll give us money for each fiscal year. Senate Bill 30 would gave us one money, so it creates a bit of a staggering effect, but it's just something we're going to manage over the years. The result is a nearly $3 billion biennial operating budget that for the next 2 years that covers all the provisions of House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 30. So yeah, as I mentioned, going to the LAR, our base budget for all funds was about 1.9 billion. We had 4 exceptional items totaling $235 million. As I mentioned, total budget is $2.947 billion. You go to the next slide.
So Anthony, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So this that we just got handed today, is there any change to what we received supplemental to the board?
No, the very last line, which says autism program, was hidden. The totals were all there. Just as I tried to get everything to fit on one page, I hid the autism program row.
Oh.
It was all in there. I didn't want to think the autism program was not included in our budget. It's a standalone appropriation. It just felt very close to the bottom.
Okay,
That's all. All the numbers are identical other than that.
thank you.
Thank you. So as I said, for exceptional items, normally you're lucky to get 1 item funded. We were able to get 4 items funded to some extent. Ultimately, of the $235 million that were requested, we received $209 million. And I do want to note for exceptional items 2 and 3 that some of those amounts were added to our capital budget authority. And the primary benefit of that is help us kind of manage expenses that have to flow through our data center budget. A lot of IT procurements are now required to flow through the data center services. So getting that authority up front will hopefully help us kind of operate more smoothly over the next 2 years. Next slide. The surplus, also allowed money to be added that we did not formally request in our LAR. Here is the most significant changes. A lot of this has been mentioned or kind of alluded to in some of the other presentations this morning. But as you can see, the healthcare programs and the mental health programs in particular received significant funding bumps from our base budget. And this is all from our base budget that we requested. These were all increases. Next slide. And then there was another layer for this budget, which were new programs, which kind of did not currently have in our budget requests, or kind of were not maybe did not even exist. And some of those were related to recently passed legislation, like Senate Bill 25, and some other ones were even tied to legislation that passed in prior sessions but never received funding for us to implement. So that some money was provided there so we can implement those programs. Again, it's a lot of our academic and health and financial aid programs were impacted here. Next slide. And now I want to touch on some of the other notable components of the operating budget. House Bill 8, there's an administrative component for the coordinating board. A lot of this is going out as grants. So I think we mentioned $239 million in our TEOG grants. There's also a FAST program where we're working with the Texas Education Agency to move money from us to the institutions, and then some other grant programs as well to help us implement the various provisions of House Bill 8. There's also the return of the Beyond Time Fund. So this is a fund that abolishes, prior legislation abolished this fund in August of 2024. Senate Bill 30, the supplemental bill, gave us authority to kind of write the check to kind of refund institutions for the balance. It's a $141 million note that it says estimated. So what will happen is the actual balance that exists at that time is what we will be appropriated in return. So it is likely going to be more based on most recent projections, but we'll just have to wait until the fund abolishes and return the money. So we project that to be in fiscal year 2025. And then I just want to touch on the House Bill 1 authorized 5% salary increases for state employees, and then they put that money in a standalone appropriation, which was unique compared to other budgets. But we will actually administer that in our other operating budgets. So we'll have to do budget adjustments based on where the FTEs are, and that's something every agency is going to do to manage these. Also, I want to point out, Senate Bill 30 actually accelerated this, so our first 5% increase is effective this month for employees. So then basically we take these items and we add in kind of regular alignments we do for our collective budgets, our federal budgets. Those are items where we put in estimated amounts in our LAR, but what we actually can spend is based on the funds we collect. So we try to right size that for this budget here, so we can kind of operate from our best estimate. That's kind of how we get to the full operating budget that I'm happy to present for your approval.
I would like to comment, new board members, Anthony is relatively new to the agency, and I've seen your progress and all the details in higher education, this agency, and you've come a long way, which is what I compliment you and your team, because there's a lot of complex financial issues, obviously, in this industry, so.
It's a very unique time to join. I'll say that, and definitely a unique session from a budgeting standpoint to manage. And yes, there's a lot of new appropriations for us to manage, but you know, it's a good challenge for us. And you know, my goal for my team is always to help us implement things as smoothly as possible. So that's really what we're trying to do from my perspective. Going forward. Thank you.
It's definitely an exciting budget to approve. So we want to make the motion to approve that.
So moved.
Yes. Second. Ms. Williams. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6C is consideration and possible action to approve the Texas Department of Information Resources interagency contract budget for the Data Service Center. Mr. Argentini will present this item as well.
So like many agencies, the coordinating board must enter into an interagency contract with the Department of Information Resources, or DIR, each biennium to pay for our costs related to data center services for the DCS program. These are mandatory services that DCS provides, the annual support for our network and other IT related services and purchases. Payments for this are governed by our capital budget rider, and I believe that our exceptional items 2 and 3 increase our capital budget authority. There's also our regular capital budget authority, which is in House Bill 1. So when we add all of those together, there's also provisions within the budget as far as managing our capital budget appropriations. We've tried to come up with the right 2-year number that we can manage these data center funds to the extent that the funding allows us to do. And that's kind of how we came up with our $18.5 million for the 2 years, which is a significant increase from maybe historically where we've been, but it is a reflection of a lot of the initiatives that have been going on and a lot of the technology work that's going through the data center. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
If not, can I have a motion to approve the Texas Department of Information Resources interagency contract budget for data centers? Chairman Motion by Ms. Hawk,
Second.
second by Mr. Williams. Any further discussion? Not all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion passes. Agenda item 7A is discussion of the audit of agency-wide financial statements for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2022 by KPMG. This item does not require any action. Ms. Susan Warren, audit partner, and Shannon Panels, senior manager for KPMG, will present this item and be available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, board members, appreciate the opportunity to be here. We are going to present the results, as you can see on the screen, from the August 22 audit that was issued in late May or June. Hopefully we need some feedback. Yes, sir.
Yes, Ms. Warren, since we have 3 new board members, I would like to see, Madam Chair, if Ms. Warren can let us know about KPMG and the role that you do for the coordinating board and the reason that you present to us.
Absolutely. So the coordinating board has hired KPMG to do a financial audit. That requires delegation authority from the state auditor's office. The coordinating board does roll up into the statewide audit, or ACFR as we refer to it. So you have a standalone audit that then is utilized in the statewide audit, if you will. We usually do those about 6 months after fiscal year end, because you have to finish the state process first, and then we come into the actual standalone outside audit. We present to the board officially twice. We come in April to do our planning session, which we did. So that's where we talk about the risk, the approach, what's new and different. A lot of what you've heard Anthony talk about, that type of stuff comes into the audit eventually right as the money gets spent. So we talk about the risk, present that approach, take any questions, have like we call it a question answer brainstorming, but the board gets to provide answers to questions to have input into the risk assessment process at that point in time. And we perform the audit from April to June. And we usually come back in July and present the results. Both of these meetings with the board are technically required in the auditing standards, where you're supposed to have interaction with the governance level and be able to present the results outside of the independent management telling you the same thing. So most of you have already heard the audit was good. We're just here to officially tell you the audit was good. That's kind of how this works.
You know, they may call you every now and then, and that's good, their feedback, so over the years, Ms. Ford and I and her team have had conversations, so thank you for that
Indeed.
explanation.
Absolutely. So we will get into the slide. Shannon's going to do quite a bit of the presentation today on the results of the audit, but I did steal her thunder because it is a good audit, so.
So if you can advance 3 slides to the summary of audit results. So here's our summary of audit results. You see a lot of X's on here, but those are all good X's because there's no matters to report related to these items. So there were no significant unusual transactions, no uncorrected or corrected audit misstatements. There were no financial statement presentation or disclosure omissions. There were no issues related to non-GAAP policies. As Susan already mentioned, we did issue an unmodified or clean audit opinion. We had no changes to our risk assessment. There were no matters to communicate as it relates to significant accounting policies or practices. In a few slides, I will be discussing in a little bit more detail the work we did over the estimate for the student loan allowance. There were no issues as it relates to financial statement disclosures, related parties, or going concern. No issues as it relates to subsequent events. There were no non-compliance with laws or significant difficulties encountered or issues discussed with management. And there were no difficult or contentious matters for which we were consulted and no disagreements with management either. And if you can advance to the next slide. There were also no actual or suspected fraud involving management. From a written communication perspective, our representation letter was distributed with your materials. And as always, we do remind you that from an independence perspective, we are independent as it relates to the coordinating board as a term is defined by the professional standards. The next slide talks about the significant accounting estimate. So we did perform procedures over the allowance for doubtful accounts, and we evaluated the key factors and assumptions surrounding that estimate and determined it to be noticeable. And now Susan is gonna go over the inquiry.
Any questions? I mean, it was a clean audit, as we mentioned. So congratulations to the committee, Anthony and the staff, everybody, because it does take the agency, even the IT team helps us with those. It is an agency-wide effort to get this audit done. Any particular questions from anyone? Any board members? All right, so the next slide, the last one, should look familiar to you. These are the inquiries we brought to your attention in April. But it's here more of a reminder of the key things we look for when we do our risk assessments. And we did update these inquiries with management, and a few of you, Dr. Fraser Bridge, and I talked to you on the phone and updated them during the audit. There was no other changes here for me to report to you today from what we had discussed in the public meeting in April. That is the end of our prepared remarks, unless you have additional questions.
Members, any questions? Well, again, thank you to the coordinating board staff and leadership, and thank you very much for your hard work, and we appreciate the great work and the eyes on us. You're doing everything well.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 7B is a discussion of an audit report on the College Access Loan Program at the Higher Education Coordinating Board issued in April 2023 by the Texas State Auditor's Office. Mr. James Timberlake, Audit Manager, and Ms. Jennifer Brantley, Managing Senior Auditor from the State Auditor's Office, will present this item and be available to answer any questions. Timberlake.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to present the results of our audit of the College Access Loan Program. The objective of that audit was to determine whether the Higher Education Coordinating Board had processes and related controls to help ensure that it administered the college access loan program in accordance with applicable requirements. And Jennifer Brantley was the project manager for this project and so present the results at a high level.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We found that the coordinating board administered the college access loan program in accordance with applicable criteria, that the coordinating board has established controls to ensure that borrowers met Cal eligibility requirements and the loans accounts were updated accurately. We actually only issued one recommendation to the coordinating board, so it was a fairly good news report as well. Just that the coordinating board should specify a time period to review error reports from its higher education loan management system to ensure that accounts are updated in a timely manner. We found one account that hadn't been updated in nearly a year. When we went to look for it, we found there was an error report from the system that hadn't been reviewed, and there were additional 68 of 221 loan accounts on that report that hadn't been updated in a year. It seems the error report was a COVID issue, you know, people left and the report kind of got missed in some of the transition to remote work. But the coordinating board staff took to it right away. They went and investigated, they double checked all the other error reports that they had and made sure that all the accounts got updated even before we finished the audit. We also looked at the information technology systems regarding Cal, which is the higher education loan management system. We found that the board is effectively maintaining the completeness, integrity, and availability of the Cal data. We also did looked at a prior audit report to see how implementation had been done on a prior audit report recommendation. And we found that that report, that recommendation had been fully implemented by the board. That was for an audit report on financial management processes, which was issued in June of 2020.
Wait, this is a feel-good meeting.
Are there any questions on that audit report?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 7C is consideration and possible action to adopt the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2024. Mr. Paul Mayer, Interim Assistant Commissioner of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item and be available to answer any questions. Mr. Mayer, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Mayer, Interim Assistant Commissioner, Internal Audit and Compliance. We are seeking your consideration and approval for our annual internal audit plan for the upcoming year. I'll turn it off. That helps. Thank you. More details of the plan, including the annual plan document, are in your materials. I'm providing a few comments and highlights from the plan, and then we'll respond to any comments or suggestions that you may have. First, I would like to provide an overview of the department. We have a total of 13 positions in the Internal Audit and Compliance Department in 3 primary areas: internal audit, state compliance monitoring, and federal compliance monitoring, with 3 of those positions specifically assigned to internal audit. The internal audit plan represents our evaluation of the highest risks as required by state law and professional standards. Plan development is systematic and collaborative, relying on both quantitative and qualitative information. We sought and received input and feedback from board leadership, executive leadership, and others outside stakeholders. That evaluation resulted in identifying 2 higher risk areas and 2 other additional areas on this year's plan. The 2 higher risk areas noted are the same as 2 key areas in the current year plan. These areas are information security and grants fund management. They continue to be areas of significant change and importance to the agency. Our plan is to continue to provide review and advising in these areas and as they continue to develop. We appreciate management's cooperation and receptiveness of our review in light of the significant work that is being conducted in these areas. The other 2 areas that were identified include a review of grant research funding and contract management administration. In addition to these 4 primary areas of work, we also continue work in corrective action implementation, investigations, external audit assistance, and our own internal self-assessment. Lastly, I'd like to provide some additional information that we considered in the development of the internal audit plan. First of all, our goal is to be stakeholder-centric and to add value. Second, we took into consideration past recommendations that relate to ongoing risk, primarily in the areas of risk assessments and user access controls. These areas are taken into account in all the areas that we review. Department program risk assessments continue to evolve. These assessments identify key objectives and roadblocks on department and on the department and program level. Reducing them to writing can help inform management and can be used to identify legacy issues that may not be immediately apparent. With regard to user access, although access controls to network systems is reasonably developed, user access controls to specific files and data continue to be identified in recommendations. These user access controls within the network environment are important to control privacy and personally identified information on a need-to-know basis. That concludes my discussion regarding the annual internal audit plan. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have in pre-consideration.
Do you have any questions? I know a lot of work went into this, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. We need a motion, however, to adopt the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2024. We have a motion, so moved by Ms. Williams, and second by Mr. Wilson. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. The motion passes. Agenda item 7D is the auditor's update on internal audit reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Paul Mayer, interim assistant commissioner for internal audit and compliance, will present this.
Thank you. We have completed one report since our prior meeting in April, and that report is our quarterly corrective action status report. And although this list has a number of items listed, management is making significant progress on these recommendations. The craft recommendations are a little longer in term to complete and require improvement and implementation of new software. Several of the DMI and gear recommendations have been completed by management, and we'll verify those as we report on them on an ongoing basis. The new SAO recommendation that was just discussed with regard to the Cal audit actually has also been completed. When they did, SAO was out to do the NRUF audit. They looked at that to verify its completion. They're yet to report on that, but that has been completed as well. That showed up for the first time on that corrective action list because it's a new recommendation that will come off as we have that it's verified. That concludes my remarks with regard to the internal audit update. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Okay, we will move on to agenda item 8A. Items 1 through 11, those are the auditor's updates on state and federal compliance monitoring reports and activities. These items also don't require any action, and Mr. Mayor will present this item.
Thank you. We completed 10 state compliance monitoring projects since our prior AOC meeting in April, and each of the reports are included in your materials. I'd like to highlight just one of those reports, and that's the audit of formula funding at Austin Community College. This report includes an observation regarding information security controls. In particular, the student information system does not provide audit logs or change history for critical formula funding data, which may limit the ability to verify the integrity of the system information. Management at the institution is addressing the noted issue. With regard to federal compliance monitoring, I just direct you to the details of the materials and note that we continue with subrecipient monitoring, reviews, and other federal subrecipient review work. That concludes my compliance monitoring update. I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Any questions? It's a lot of reports with no findings, so that's a good thing.
Lots of assurance on compliance.
Okay, agenda item 8B is consideration of possible action to adopt the annual state compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2024. Mr. Mayor will present this item.
Thank you. We're requesting consideration and approval on our annual state compliance monitoring plan for the upcoming fiscal year. More details of the plan are in your materials, including the plan document itself. I'll provide a few comments with highlights from the plan, and then we'll respond to any comments and suggestions that you may have. First, I'd like to briefly revisit our overview of the department. As noted in the internal audit plan discussion, we have 13 positions in the department. For this particular area, state compliance monitoring, we have 5 positions that are associated with that. With regard to community college funding that's being implemented, A supplemental work plan will be brought later in the year to address any changes there as we add staff and address those two pieces. Like the internal audit plan, this compliance monitoring plan uses a systematic approach, looking at both quantitative and qualitative information from various sources. Our compliance monitoring plan covers 3 statutorily required areas. First, formula funding data review, which is approximately 20% of the plan. Next, state financial assistance fund compliance reviews. That's approximately 35% of the plan. And that difference is primarily related to the larger number of institutions that receive financial aid as opposed to formula funding. Lastly, the third statutorily defined area is compliance with the Texas sexual misconduct related reporting statutes, and that's approximately 25% of the plan. We have a lot of time for follow-up recommendations, self-assessment, quality assurance, and that makes up the remaining 20% of the allotted hours. The development of compliance monitoring plan considers qualitative factors, however, it's more quantitative centric. Obviously, since it's compliance based, it's more quantifiable across many institutions. In addition, the state compliance monitoring plan has specific statutory requirements that are required as part of the risk-based development. There are 6 specific risk factors that are required by statute. They are identified at the top of the plan, and I'd just like to point to 2 of those that are primary drivers in institutions that end up on the plan. First is the amount of dollars that they receive, and the second is the last time since we looked at their institution. Those drive essentially how often and when we go back to the institution. That concludes my discussion regarding the annual state compliance monitoring plan and seek your consideration and approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? If not, can I have a motion to adopt the annual state compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2024?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Wilson. Second, Ms. Williams. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. And this concludes the Agency Operations Committee meeting. The time is 12:44. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Williams in a second. Dr. Farias, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you all very much.